South Australian politics is set for generational change, with the Premier Mike Rann heeding the message from factional leaders and agreeing to stand down. But he won't leave just yet. Mr Rann will outline his own timetable when he returns from an overseas trip, leaving his nominated replacement, Jay Weatherill, in limbo. Mr Rann's resignation after 17 years as Labor leader is expected to prompt a wider shake-up of the 9-year-old South Australian government. Nick Harmson reports.
Mike Rann's political bell is tolling, but his cabinet colleagues don't know when it will stop.
It's business as usual.
The leader in waiting is happy to wait, while the Premier thinks through his position on a week-long trip to India.
There's no question of a challenge. There's an agreed transition. Mr Rann will come back and make a further statement about his future.
Like Labor leaders past, Mr Rann has no choice but to go.
It sounds like decisions are being made by Labor factional bosses again, taking it out of the hands of voters.
It sounds to me like Mike Rann, who's always been focused on what's best for South Australia, continues to have that focus.
Unlike Kevin Rudd, Mr Rann will set his own departure date. Before he goes, he wants to approve the expansion of the Olympic Dam mine, a project he views as his economic legacy.
Mike Rann's fallen on his sword. The problem is it's one of those plastic retractable swords.
What we're seeing at the moment is a recipe for chaos, to have a situation where for an unknown number of months we've got a dead duck Premier.
At the moment, there's also an acting Premier. John Rao is steering the ship while Mike Rann is overseas, but his permanent promotion was scuttled by his right faction colleagues.
There is a consensus position which has been arrived at amongst members of the Labor Party, and I support that consensus.
Mike Rann isn't doing interviews, but he is taking calls.
I spoke last night with the Premier, who's very chipper.
Just not from the man he says he wants to mentor.
You've tried calling his mobile phone?
Of course.
How many times?
Well, I've tried to get in contact.
The Premier's not the only one steering clear of the consensus candidate.
Do you expect to hold on to your cabinet spot under Jay Weatherill?
He's just there, Minister.
Right faction figures like Tom Koutsantonis and Kevin Foley have long rivalled the left leader. Some suspect his ascension will prompt Mr Foley to leave politics.
I'm a shy, retiring type now with the media.
Retiring in more than the sense you mean it?
No, I'm just not going to give you any comment, Nick.
If Mr Rann's long-serving former deputy does decide to follow him into retirement, the party could be faced with the prospect of twin by-elections. Mr Rann's seat would most likely be safe for Labor, but Mr Foley's would be under threat. A test of Labor's new look. Nick Harmson, Lateline.